The WNBA is currently standing at the most paradoxical and precarious juncture in its 28-year history. Following the 2024 and 2025 seasons, which were defined by unprecedented growth, record-breaking viewership, surging attendance, and the mainstream cultural phenomenon known as the Caitlin Clark effect, the league is simultaneously facing an existential threat from within. The expiration of the Collective Bargaining Agreement, or CBA, and the subsequent authorization of a strike by the Women's National Basketball Players Association has created a volatile standoff between labor and management. This is an exhaustive analysis of the current labor crisis, forecasting a potential for a catastrophic collapse similar to the 1994 Major League Baseball strike. To understand the gravity of this moment, we have to look at the economic chasm regarding revenue-sharing models, specifically the conflict between gross versus net revenue splits. We have to explore the sociological impact of what players call draconian working conditions that have radicalized the player base. Furthermore, we must look at the 1994 MLB strike and the subsequent dissolution of the Montreal Expos franchise as a critical historical case study. This isn't just a sports story, it's a high-stakes financial drama. A miscalculation in the coming months could unravel decades of progress, potentially alienating a newly acquired fan base, voiding the very media rights deals that promised a solvent future, and leaving expansion franchises in ruin. The trajectory of the WNBA over the last 24 months has been nothing short of meteoric. For decades, the league operated as a niche property, subsidized heavily by the NBA and struggling for mainstream relevance. The arrival of generational talents, most notably Caitlin Clark, alongside Angel Reese and a deep rookie class, catalyzed a transformation in the league's economic reality. Metrics across the board have shattered previous ceilings. Viewership for regular season games featuring the Indiana Fever rivaled NBA playoff broadcasts. Attendance surged, forcing teams to relocate games to larger NBA arenas to accommodate demand. Merchandise sales exploded, with jerseys becoming cultural currency. This surge culminated in a new media rights agreement valued at $2.2 billion over 11 years, a quantum leap from the previous $60 million annual valuation. But beneath this veneer of success lies a brewing labor crisis of historic proportions. The players argue that the league's prosperity has not trickled down to the labor force that drives it. In October 2024, the union exercised its right to opt out of the existing collective bargaining agreement, setting a deadline for a new deal. As negotiations stalled, the deadline was extended to January 9, 2026. The tension reached a boiling point in December 2025, when the players voted to authorize a strike. The vote was decisive. 93% of eligible players participated, and 98% voted in favor. This was not merely a procedural step, it was a mandate for militancy. The union's leadership has been empowered to call a work stoppage at any moment they deem necessary after the deadline passes. While the expiration of a CBA typically leads to a status quo period where operations continue under old rules, the strike authorization shatters this norm. It introduces a nuclear option into the negotiation room. The league, led by Commissioner Kathy Engelbert, faces the prospect of a lockout or a mid-season strike that could wipe out the 2026 season entirely. Such an event would not merely be a pause, but a potential extinction event for the version of the WNBA that currently exists, threatening the $2.2 billion media deal and the solvency of new expansion franchises. The core of the current dispute is not simply about salary numbers, it is a fundamental ideological conflict regarding the business model of women's professional basketball. The divergence between the union's demands and the WNBA's offers represents a disagreement on the maturity, profitability, and transparency of the business. The union has explicitly targeted a transformative shift, demanding a revenue-sharing model based on gross revenue. Specifically, reports indicate the union is seeking approximately 30% of gross revenue. To be clear, gross revenue encompasses every dollar generated by the league before any expenses are deducted. This includes ticket sales, merchandise, concessions, parking, local and national media rights fees, and sponsorship deals. By pegging salaries to gross revenue, players ensure they immediately participate in the league's top-line growth. If the new media deal injects capital, or if expansion fees bring in hundreds of millions, the player share rises automatically. This model protects players from creative accounting where a league might hide profits by inflating expenses. The players argue that the current system forces them to fight for crumbs after the league deducts expansive and potentially opaque operational costs. In contrast, the WNBA's counterproposal offers what appears to be a massive optical increase in compensation while retaining the net revenue structure. The league has proposed an uncapped revenue-sharing model that would purportedly give players over 70% of net revenue. But here is the trap. Sources familiar with the negotiations indicate that 70% of net revenue equates to less than 15% of total league revenue once expenses are factored in. This disparity highlights the massive overhead the league claims to carry. The league's offer includes raising the salary cap from $1.5 million to roughly $5 million per team. It would quadruple the maximum salary from roughly $249,000 to over $1.3 million, and increase the average salary to over $530,000. Despite these historic increases, which would turn minimum wage players into quarter-millionaires and stars into millionaires, the union rejected the offer, labeling it a slap in the face. The rejection stems from a profound lack of trust. In corporate accounting, net figures are malleable. If the league decides to triple its marketing budget or increase executive compensation, the net pool shrinks and player salaries stagnate. By accepting a net-based split, the players would be essentially underwriting the league's operational decisions without having a vote in them. The negotiation is further complicated by the disputed financial health of the WNBA. There exists a dual reality where both sides are operating from different sets of facts. The WNBA claims it has never turned a profit in its 28-year existence. Leadership has cited losses of roughly $10 million annually historically, growing to an estimated $50 million loss in 2024 despite record revenue. The league argues that paying 30% of gross revenue when the business is operating in the red would result in catastrophic losses projected at $700 million over the life of the new CBA. The players view these loss figures with extreme skepticism. They point to the NBA's 60 to 75% ownership stake in the WNBA and the opaque nature of the integrated business model. The union contends that the losses are often investments in future valuation or are the result of the NBA shifting costs onto the WNBA's books. They argue that their 30% gross revenue proposal would still leave the league in a profitable position. This factual standoff, where two sides cannot agree on basic arithmetic, creates a fertile ground for a prolonged strike. While the revenue split is the headline issue, the emotional momentum for the strike is fueled by decades of what the union describes as draconian provisions regarding player lifestyle and autonomy. The shift in power dynamics, driven by the league's popularity, has brought these indignities to the forefront. For nearly 3 decades, WNBA players, some of the tallest and most physically valuable athletes in the world, have been mandated to fly commercial economy class. This policy was enforced not just by budget constraints, but by league rules designed to ensure competitive parity, punishing owners who attempted to charter flights for their teams out of their own pockets. The sleep in the airport incident of August 2022 became a rallying cry. After a game in Washington, D.C., the Los Angeles Sparks faced a travel nightmare when their commercial flight was canceled. Due to a lack of available hotel rooms, half the team was forced to sleep on airport benches. Photos of the union president sleeping on an airport terminal floor went viral. This image became the visual representation of the league's disrespect. While NBA players fly on private jets with catered meals, WNBA stars were sleeping on public floors. Research indicates that sleep loss and cramped travel conditions significantly increase the risk of injury. For professional athletes, this was seen as negligence. Then there are the security risks. The arrest of Brittany Griner in Russia highlighted geopolitical risks, but domestic travel also poses safety issues. In 2023, Griner was harassed by a provocateur at a Dallas-Fort Worth airport while traveling commercially. This incident underscored the security failures of the public travel model for high-profile celebrities. Although the league launched a charter flight program in 2024, the union views this as a reactionary measure rather than a proactive right enshrined in the CBA. They want these standards codified to prevent future backsliding. One of the most contentious elements of the 2020 CBA was the prioritization clause. This rule penalized veteran players who missed the start of WNBA training camp because they were finishing their seasons with overseas clubs. Because WNBA salaries have historically been so low, players had to play overseas in places like Turkey or China to maximize their earning years. These contracts often paid 5 to 10 times the WNBA salary. The prioritization rule essentially forced players to choose: quit your high-paying overseas job early to report to the WNBA on time, or be banned from the WNBA for the season. The union views this as draconian because it restricts a player's right to earn a market wage globally, while the WNBA refuses to pay a full-time wage domestically. The impact of Caitlin Clark on the league's economics cannot be overstated, and her presence complicates the labor negotiations significantly. She is both the union's greatest leverage and the league's greatest liability if a strike occurs. Her presence galvanized business metrics, viewership records were shattered, and the Indiana Fever routinely sold out NBA-sized arenas. This surge in attention directly facilitated the WNBA's new media rights agreement of $200 million annually. However, the union argues that this deal proves the money exists but also contends it undervalues the league. They believe the NBA bundled the WNBA to sweeten its own $76 billion pot without maximizing the WNBA's specific value. They fear that locking in a long-term deal without a revenue-sharing mechanism will trap them in a fixed-income scenario while the league's value continues to compound. Interestingly, Clark herself occupies a unique position. As the primary driver of the new revenue, she has the most leverage, yet she has publicly urged caution, stating that this is not something that can be messed up. She recognizes that her off-court earnings, like her $28 million Nike deal, are predicated on her on-court visibility. A strike that wipes out a season diminishes her brand. This brings us to the expansion house of cards. The WNBA's expansion strategy is aggressively leveraged against future growth. The league has awarded franchises to Golden State, Toronto, and Portland. These expansion fees are critical. While early reports pegged fees at $50 million, later entrants are reportedly involved in commitments pushing $125 to $250 million. Critics argue the league is operating a quasi-Ponzi scheme, using these massive one-time expansion fees to plug current operating losses. The players see these checks and demand a share, arguing they built the value that allows the league to charge such fees. The Toronto Tempo and Portland Fire are slated to begin play in 2026. But here's the problem. An expansion draft cannot occur without a CBA, because the rules for protecting players are collectively bargained. If there is no deal by January 2026, these teams will have no players. If the league ceases to operate for a season, or if the strike voids media deals, the value of these franchises plummets. Investors who paid $250 million could potentially seek legal recourse. These expansion teams are uniquely vulnerable, poised for success but liable to be wiped out before they even tip off. To understand the gravity of the situation, we must analyze the 1994 Major League Baseball strike. This event serves as the closest historical parallel to a league committing suicide during a peak moment of popularity. In 1994, MLB was enjoying a renaissance. Attendance was at record highs. The Montreal Expos were the best team in baseball, favorites to win the World Series. On August 12, 1994, the players struck. The season was canceled, including the World Series, a first in 90 years. The fallout was devastating. When baseball returned in 1995, average attendance dropped by 20%. Fans were furious, booing players and holding signs about greed. It took nearly 4 years for baseball to recover its cultural footing. But the most chilling lesson is the fate of the Montreal Expos. The strike robbed them of their championship and the revenue needed to sustain their roster. Forced to slash payroll, the Expos sold off their stars. The franchise never recovered. Fan interest evaporated, and eventually the franchise was dissolved and relocated to become the Washington Nationals. The WNBA is far more fragile than 1994 MLB. Baseball had a century of history. The WNBA has only 2 years of mainstream solvency. If a strike occurs, the casual fans brought in by Caitlin Clark, who have no deep loyalty to the league's history, may simply drift away. The WNBA does not have the reservoir of goodwill to survive a Montreal Expos scenario. The emergence of Unrivaled, the 3-on-3 league co-founded by Nafisa Collier and Brianna Stewart, introduces a new variable. It is often cited as a plan B for players, but it is insufficient to support the ecosystem. While Unrivaled boasts high average salaries of roughly $220,000 for an 8-week season and offers players equity, it only employs about 36 players. The WNBA employs 144. The vast majority of players would have no safety net in a strike. Furthermore, Caitlin Clark is not playing in Unrivaled. Without her, it cannot replicate the WNBA's viewership. Fracturing the talent pool across niche leagues dilutes the product and destroys the Super League value proposition. Finally, we must consider the legal risks. The most catastrophic risk of a strike is the potential cancellation of the $2.2 billion media rights deal. Standard commercial contracts contain force majeure clauses. These clauses excuse performance if an event beyond control, like a strike, prevents the delivery of games. If the union strikes and games are canceled, broadcasters like Disney and Amazon are not obligated to pay the rights fees. Prolonged failure to deliver content can even allow broadcasters to terminate the contract entirely. If the WNBA misses the 2026 season, partners could void the agreement or force a renegotiation at lower rates, destroying the very revenue pot the players are fighting over. Sponsorship deals with partners like Nike and AT&T also likely contain exit clauses. A strike that turns fans against the players could trigger a sponsor exodus. Nike, having committed $28 million to Clark, needs games to be played to see a return. If the league is dark, the marketing machine stalls. The WNBA is currently playing a game of brinkmanship with the highest stakes in the history of women's sports. The players' grievances are legitimate. They have been underpaid and subjected to substandard conditions for decades. Their demand for a share of the gross revenue is rational. However, the timing is a double-edged sword. The bull case is that the strike threat forces the NBA backers to share the wealth. A deal is reached in January, and the league launches into 2026 with labor peace. The bear case is the collapse. The players overplay their hand, believing the money is there when the league is truly cash poor. The owners lock out, the season is delayed, and casual fans lose interest. The expansion teams falter, and the media deal is jeopardized. The WNBA repeats the mistake of the 1994 Montreal Expos, sacrificing its golden era on the altar of a labor dispute it cannot afford to lose. As the world started watching, turning the lights off now would be a tragic irony and potentially a fatal error. The next few weeks leading to January 9, 2026, will determine if the WNBA becomes a global powerhouse or a cautionary tale in the annals of sports business.